I'm Nicole Shivchurin.
And I'm William Woodrow.
Today we have inspiring immigrant stories based on new research about the Angel Island Immigration Station in San Francisco Bay.
Why did a Caucasian woman with her son have to demand to be led into the Japanese internment camps in America during World War II? How did the crushed dreams of a Mexican immigrant family inspire the naming of an elementary school in San Jose? How were the struggles of a group of Filipino immigrant veterans finally addressed by President Obama's stimulus package?
Angel Island is often misleadingly called the Ellis Island of the West Coast. Unlike Ellis Island, where the Statue of Liberty welcomes immigrants from around the world, Angel Island was both America's Pacific port of entry and a gate to lock out immigrants from entering the United States.
Over 1 million immigrants were processed at Angel Island from 1910 to 1940. The most well-known of these Asian immigrants were the Chinese, who were barred from America by the 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act and carved poems on the barrack walls in protest.
Professors Erica Lee and Judy Young are publishing new research for the 2010 centennial of the Angel Island Immigration Station. This archival research has brought to light international voices from Angel Island.
Professor Erica Lee, now a history professor at the University of Minnesota, had a personal family connection to the history of Angel Island.
My paternal grandfather, Lee Chiut, came through Angel Island in 1918. He came as a paper son with false papers, which was very common during the time. He eventually found work as a cook in the Spreckles family mansion in San Francisco. It's a great big mansion in Pacific Heights. The Spreckles family was one of the largest sugar-making companies and families in California during that time. And he did not know any English when he first came. The way that he taught himself English was from a Chinese English cookbook that he read at night after work. My maternal grandmother, Moy Sao Bic, came through Seattle in 1930 as a merchant's wife. She came to join my grandfather in New York, who had entered this country through Ellis Island.
Erica Lee's family entered America from both coasts and had to be resourceful to survive in a strange and unfamiliar country.
Both my maternal grandparents and paternal grandparents, like many Chinese immigrants during this time, came to the United States in search of the American dream, if not for themselves, then for their children and perhaps their grandchildren. So they worked very long hours in restaurants and in laundries and in small shops in order to make that economic leap. My maternal grandparents ran well-known restaurants in Brooklyn, New York, and my grandfather, Hui Bingji, went on to become the president of the New York Chinese Restaurant Association, which was a big honor at that time.
Despite being a hard-working immigrant family, Professor Lee's family encountered various hardships.
Unfortunately, like many other Chinese Americans, my grandparents faced a lot of discrimination and injustice in their daily lives. So neither their economic success nor their community status protected them from overzealous immigration law enforcement. There were a lot of raids, a lot of immigration actions against the Chinese immigrant and Chinese American community at this time. This is so important to remember because when we think about debates over immigration and immigration detention and illegal immigrants, we think that this is only a late 20th century or a 21st century development. But this history of Chinese immigration during the exclusion era is really when this started. And this affected many families. So for example, when there was a mix-up in the immigration service about my grandmother's immigration status, whether she was in the country lawfully, the immigration service issued an arrest warrant and an order for her deportation. She's the mother of 3 kids at this time, so this would have been very drastic. My grandparents were able to correct the situation, but these actions were very common and it led many Chinese Americans to live in the shadows of America.
There were 2 Americas. The Statue of Liberty welcomed immigrants to make a better life for themselves, and the garrison on Angel Island treated immigrants as unwanted foreigners.
Angel Island really represented 2 different types of America, 2 Americas. One that really was a nation of immigrants, one that welcomed immigrants, where immigrants felt that they could come to the United States in search of economic opportunity, freedom from persecution, for that promised land. But Angel Island also was a gatekeeping nation, a nation that passed restrictive, discriminatory immigration laws that viewed certain immigrant groups as undesirable foreigners, unassimilable aliens, and peoples who needed to be restricted from the country and deported from the country if already here. It's this complex history of Angel Island representing these two Americas. That's the primary goal of the book that I'm writing with historian Judy Young. It's titled Angel Island, Immigrant Gateway to America. The book is planned to come out in 2010, 100 years after the immigration station first opened its doors, and profits will go directly to the Angel Island Immigration Station Foundation.
The new book by Erica Lee and Judy Young explores new facets of Angel Island's history, focusing on the great diversity of immigrants who passed through the immigration station.
Until recently, the vast majority of what we have known about Angel Island and its history has centered almost exclusively on the Chinese immigrant experience. And this has made sense in many ways. The motivation to build the immigration station was largely grounded in the country's need to enforce the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. This law prohibited the entry of Chinese laborers and allowed only a few select classes of immigrants to apply for admission. Chinese immigrants were also the largest group to be processed on the island. The second largest group were Japanese. The discovery of many Chinese poems and inscriptions in the 1970s on the immigration station site helped to pave the way for the immigration station to be preserved and recognized as a National Historic Landmark in 1998. But as important as the Chinese immigrant experience on Angel Island is, there are many stories of other immigrant groups that need to be recovered and preserved.
The global character of immigration through Angel Island includes Germans, Japanese, Koreans, Jews, Punjabi Sikhs, and other groups.
Even today, we can feel the presence of a multitude of immigrant groups in the 300 inscriptions that we found at the site in German, in Japanese, in Korean, Hebrew, Punjabi, and English on the barrack walls. These inscriptions were discovered when the Angel Island Station Foundation recently conducted a comprehensive survey of all writings on the walls of the immigration site. We see the global character of immigration through Angel Island in the faces of people from photographs and archives, and we have found stories of particular immigrants in the immigration files. So we wanted to know, who were these immigrants? Where did they come from? What were their experiences on Angel Island? And what do their stories tell us about Angel Island's role as a gateway to America? We've been hard at work in the archives, in communities, tracking down stories and long forgotten records.
The history of immigration on Angel Island represents both the best and the worst of American history.
This history is the story of men and women and children who crossed the Pacific Ocean, traveled north from South America to seek new lives in the United States. This is the part that is Angel Island's history as a nation of immigrants. But it's also the story of harsh and discriminatory immigration laws and of immigrant perseverance. And so it's the story of a place, Angel Island, that became America's Pacific gateway, forever changing the lives of immigrants and of America itself.
Angel Island Detention Station. Angel Island. What a beautiful name. But there are no angels here, only nameless immigrant prisoners. Today is gone, but agony, anguish, and anxiety stay with me through the dark night until dawn. Tears in my eyes have dried up. After several days of incarceration, no more tears of sadness, no more tears of anguish. Those are the words that I, Goso Yoneda, saw on the walls of the barracks of Angel Island on a wintry day in November 1926. Being an alien ineligible for citizenship, my father couldn't own his own land. The land he turned into fertile farmlands with his own hands. I was born into the life of working on a vegetable plantation with my two sisters and parents. Life was simple, but decent. In time, however, my father fell ill with tuberculosis, and our family decided to move back to Japan. Back, though, is a funny word. Having been born and raised all my life in Glendale, California, I felt more like a foreigner in Japan than I did a returning countryman. Throughout my father's illness and until the day of his death, I tried to fit into Japan. I dropped out of high school, participated in several protests, but I just didn't belong. The prospect of being drafted into the Imperial Army finally pushed me to make a decision. I boarded the Shinyo Maru in Yokohama to return to America. I would carry on my father's dream and do what he could not, to buy and own my own land. It took 16 days, crammed in steerage quarters filled with foul, sweaty air and the smell of pickled radish before I finally arrived. What greeted me, though, was not the warm torch of Lady Liberty, but rather the cold and solitary prison on Angel Island. I am every bit as American as those who interrogated me. I had my birth certificate to prove it. Still, I had to wait for 2 months for cousin Okimura to finish spring planting so that he could come and testify on my behalf. America is my country, so my birth certificate says. But America doesn't want me here. I hear sounds of different voices from the next cells: Chinese, Russian, Mexican, Greek, and Italian. Voices of sorrow, nostalgia, rage, and passion. New Year's Day came quietly and left silently. I will soon be age 21. No one can stop the sun.
We lived in Punjab, India for about 20 years. Since I could walk, I worked on the family farm. My friend Farida and I worked together every day from dawn to dusk. Like many others in our village, we had dreams of finding a new life filled with prosperity. But we decided to go one step further. We boarded a ship to America.
From the few friends and family who went before us, we knew that once we entered the immigration station on Angel Island, we would be interrogated. Some of the questions would be simple. When and where were you born? How many members are in your family? And what is your final destination in the United States? Yet, we memorized every type of response for every type of question that we might be asked. We didn't want to take the chance of being rejected from the United States. So, we rehearsed our answers for days.
We didn't bring any luggage with us. There was no point. Our clothes were worn out anyway. Why bring old clothes for a new life? So we got on the steamship to the U.S. as soon as we received the blessings from our relatives. The 3 weeks of traveling were not easy at all. It was crowded, foul-smelling, which led to our minds filling up with doubts. Also, there was a possibility we were going to become detainees for months if we weren't accepted into the country. Stories of travelers detained for up to 2 years or just being deported back were floating around in the ship.
It was May 20, 1910, when Telu and I finally landed on Angel Island. We still had hopes of finding a new life filled with opportunities and success. Instead, they locked us up in a detention center until our time of interview. We prayed that time would come soon.
I had heard about the fear of Orientals, but neither of us thought it would happen to us. We had heard that America was a place to go for religious freedom. Then I overheard the officers talking to themselves. They called us Hindus, invading their countries. But we were 6.
Our living conditions were nauseating. Hundreds of men crowded into a small room with 4 bunks on a pole, each one stacked above the other. The smell of sweat and dirty men filled the barracks. We wished we had brought more clothes. Sometimes we thought it might have been better not coming to America at all. I pray that no one ever has to go through that again.
Now all we cared about was getting out of this place. After 3 days in the detention center, the Angel Island inspectors decided to interview us. When they asked us why we came here, Farida said we had heard that America was a good and prosperous place, and labor was in demand. I told the inspector we came here to do whatever kind of work we could.
We worked hard on those explanations, but still saw the reluctance in the officers' eyes. However, the immigration inspectors couldn't trap us and deport us back to India.
Regardless, they stripped us naked at the medical examination, in front of everyone.
Even though we finally landed in the U.S., those 3 days in the Angel Island Detention Center felt like years. We prayed that the rest of the United States would not be like this prison. We prayed that no one else would have to endure what we had.
I was lucky. We were lucky to get out of this hell. Or at least we thought so.
My name is Esther Galarza. The revolution in Mexico began in 1910, which was causing chaos and making life unbearable for my family and me. We were under so many restrictions, and struggling to make a living. I feared my family's lives would be endangered if we had stayed in Mexico. I was pregnant, and I told my husband and my 3 children that we'd go north to find a place to settle down with our relatives in Sacramento. I felt life would be better for us in America. We heard that over 1.5 million Mexicans crossed the borders in Nogales, El Paso, and Calexico. I heard that these people were free, content, and prosperous there. Labor is in high demand in the U.S., and I was ready to take my family, work hard, in order to live a more desirable life. I want my children to dream, have choices, be successful, and find joy in life. Since I was pregnant, we decided to travel by sea. We didn't anticipate any trouble because our relatives in Sacramento would vouch for us, find us work, and a place to live. My biggest worry was to settle down before my baby was born. I remember when I first got to Angel Island, there was this musty smell in the air. It was cloudy and dark that day. The place looked like a prison. We started to feel stuck here, and we're not allowed to leave the island. We sent word to our family in Sacramento to pick us up. The youngest, my nephew Ernesto, he's so smart, and a poet too. He said he expected a fiesta of smiles. I can still hear him muttering, "Gringo bendejo, es una injusticia," when we were told that we were being sent back to Mexico. I gave birth to twins, but you wouldn't know that from the size of my belly. The babies were underweight, but we were hopeful they would get bigger when we were safe with our family in Sacramento. A very soft-spoken woman who worked at Angel Island helped me when I had my twins, gave me clothes and other things for my babies. Her name was Catherine Maurer, and she was truly an angel on this island. She helped me feel more comfortable, and I was relieved to know that someone here cared for me and my family. The immigration officials did not listen to our pleas. We tried to tell them we have the determination to work hard in the U.S. We have family here to help us. They told me my babies look ill and that we'd probably be on public assistance before long. This upset my husband. Didn't they see the conditions my family and I were living in here? They make anyone ill. We came here knowing we would have to endure obstacles. Immigration officials are blind to the strength we have and our willingness to make things work. How could they be so cruel and shatter the hopes and dreams I have for my family? Is this what America is? An unjust country to honest and sincere people?
I took that photo of Esther Galarza, her 3 children, and the newborn twins. Yes, I was able to persuade the immigration officials to let Esther give birth to the twins in the hospital. But then they were forced to return to Mexico anyway. How unfair. They even had relatives travel all the way from Sacramento to vouch for them. I remember the 10-year-old. What was his name? Ernesto. I remember Ernesto's eyes, full of fight and life, taking it all in. I've kept this verse from Luke 21, verses 14 through 15 on my mirror. Settle it, therefore, in your hearts, not to meditate before what ye shall answer. For I will give you a mouth and wisdom, which all your adversaries shall not be able to gainsay nor resist. I pray for wisdom and favor. It's been a year now since 1912, when I was appointed by the Women's Home Missionary Society of the Methodist Church to serve as deaconess on Angel Island with the U.S. Immigration Service. Angel Island is really a world mission. There are people here from all parts of the world. I like to think of my work in retrospect as candles being lighted all over the world. Maybe dimly, but candles that were lighted by inspiration. They call me the angel of Angel Island, but sometimes I wonder about my calling.
My name is Alana Bello, and I was born in the United States. My family is originally from Santa in the Philippines, and I consider myself to be Filipino American. Sure, life can sometimes be difficult for me, living in a country as a minority, but the problems I've encountered in my lifetime are nothing compared to that of my grandfather, Miguel, whose story I would like to share with you. In the spring of 1934, my grandfather left his home in Santa on the island of Ilocos in the Philippines and began his journey to America.
To him, this was the opportunity of a lifetime. Much harm had come to our country from contact with the United States. With so many of our people losing their lives, fighting for their freedom, my grandfather figured he might as well take the chance to migrate to the country that had taken away our liberties and so many lives. With America, there came the hope of something more than our family could ever dream of on our small island. My grandfather had already been to Hawaii, where he had worked on a plantation, but this time he set his sights on San Francisco, and then Watsonville, where his cousin had promised him and another cousin some work in the fields. When he landed in San Francisco on May 9, 1934, his dream was crushed. It turned out that while he was at sea, the United States government had handed the Philippines their independence, which meant that his right to enter the country was no longer the same as it had been before. In the space of one voyage at sea, his status had changed from a U.S. national to an alien. The problem for my grandfather, that was that U.S. nationals did not need documentation to enter the country, whereas aliens did. And he did not have these papers, as when he left, he was under the impression that he would not need anything. When he arrived, he was taken to the immigration facility on Angel Island, a place of horror that would put a deep scar on our family for a long time. In this terrible place, he was locked in a room with many other immigrants, people from all over Asia and South America, all trying to experience the same dream my grandfather had longed for. He had left hoping for a new chance at a life, and what he received was nothing more than a prison. Thankfully, he and several others he was with were granted parole and were allowed to leave that hellish place. After working 4 years of hard work in this country, Washington decided that the Tidings McDuffie, Filipinos as they were technically known, would be excluded from the country. My grandfather had no choice but to go on the run, as if he were some kind of criminal, and when he had done nothing apart from attempt to improve the lives of himself and his family by coming to this country. For the next 10 years, federal officials hunted him like an animal, but he was never found. The experiences of my grandfather and the many others like him at Angel Island should not be forgotten, which is why I felt this story needed to be told. People in my generation should never forget the horrible experiences their ancestors went through in order for us and our children to live the lives of freedom and prosperity we have today. This is my story.
Now we have some updates for you on those immigrant stories.
Goso in Japanese means strength of three, and Goso Yoneda, who lived until the age of 92, seemed to have at least 3 lives. Born as an American in Glendale, California, educated in Japan, and then after returning to America, Yoneda renamed himself Carl and helped to found the International Longshoremen and Warehouse Union, ILWU, and later the Alaskan Cannery Workers Union Local 2195 in San Francisco. In 1931, Yoneda participated in a demonstration against the militarism of Japan, leading to World War II, and was rescued from jail by Elaine Black, a Caucasian woman known as the Red Angel for her tireless work in getting strikers out of jail. Yoneda and Elaine fell in love, and they had a child, but had to leave California and get married in Seattle, where there were no anti-miscegenation laws. After Franklin D. Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066 on February 1942, ordering the detention of 110,000 Japanese Americans, Yoneda volunteered to help build the camp at Manzanar. Although Yoneda had helped to build the internment camp when he was interned, his wife Elaine had to protest to be let into the internment camp to live with her husband and their half-Japanese son Tom. Despite his labour organising and communist sympathies, Yoneda's loyalty was affirmed by an unexpected source, J. Edgar Hoover. Yoneda joined the fight against Japan by serving in the top-secret US military intelligence service. Carl's mother survived the Hiroshima bomb, and Yoneda visited his family when he was attending a nuclear disarmament conference in the summer of 1960. Yoneda later served as an advisor to the film Farewell to Manzanar, and 50 years after his internment, Yoneda returned to Angel Island to help translate the Japanese slogans still visible on the barrel.
Esther's nephew, the 10-year-old boy Ernesto Galarza, went on to become one of the first Mexican Americans to attend college. After earning a PhD in history from Columbia, Ernesto continued to be an active community organizer. Ernesto established the Pan-American Union to deal with education and labor in Latin America and organized farm laborers in California. He researched the conditions of the braceros, or Mexican contract laborers, and described their exploitation in his book, Merchants of Labor. His autobiography, Barrio Boy, was nominated for the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1971. In 1983, the year before he died, Ernesto worked in San Jose, California, to improve the public school education for Mexican American children, where today the Ernesto Galarza Elementary School is named after him.
Miguel Bello, Alana's grandfather, was likely one of approximately 142,000 Filipinos who fought alongside US soldiers under the American flag during World War II. The US government promised them veteran benefits, but these Filipino World War II veterans, now in their 70s and older, never received their veterans' benefits. President Barack Obama's stimulus bill contained a provision to pay the surviving Filipino veterans this long overdue debt.
America, a nation of immigrants or a nation of gatekeepers? Historically, as we have seen, America has been both. What America will be is a choice each new generation of Americans must make. And the choice is ours. I'm Nicole Shivchurin.
And I'm William Woodrow.
So when we support the work of the Angel Island Immigration Station Foundation, we are helping to reclaim more of America's history. And it is that kind of effort that allows us to understand Angel Island's relevance not only in terms of how we see the past, but also for how we live our lives today.